Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, so in this video, I would like to try to sort of delve into and understand the personality of Wendy Adelson. Okay, I think in this Dan Markel murder case, I think of all the people involved, and there are a lot of interesting people in this case, but I just think of all the people involved in this case, I think by far, I think Wendy has the most, I think, mysterious and most kind of fascinating personality. Now, her mother and her brother, Donna Adelson and Charlie Adelson, I mean, they're both very interesting people, okay? No question. And the family itself is very interesting. But I just think there's just something, some X factor, something that just makes Wendy just a little more fascinating and I think a little more mysterious, actually. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to try to flesh it out here. Um, and I did put her actually. I put her picture next to a picture of Lori Vallow, and I did that because I actually think they're very different. I don't think they're identical personalities, but I think their differences sort of highlight a couple of very remarkable similarities. And so I think hopefully we can sort of tease out those similarities while noticing the great differences. I think. And then the other thing I want to say, please, I am not an expert. Okay, my mother actually is a psychiatrist, but myself, I'm not in the mental health field. But I will say, I do come from a dysfunctional family, right? And people in my family have been diagnosed with personality disorders. Okay, including me. I have been diagnosed with a personality disorder, and I've struggled with at least trying to recover or trying to deal with it, live a life in spite of having a personality disorder. And I will admit, I think some of the bad reputation is probably well deserved. I think, I don't want to say that, but have personality disorders are kind of serious. Although I do think there's a lot of hype out there, and I think that the actual reality of personality disorders, I'm not even sure that psychology really has a handle on the reality, the actual reality. I think it is a mystery. I think still for all of us, even though we all think we understand, even for me, it's been difficult. But all I'm going to say is I'm just going to try as a non-expert to do my best to offer what I see in Wendy Adelson, and I just offer it just as a lay opinion, a non-expert opinion. Okay, so basically, it's no secret. Obviously, anybody who looks at Wendy will see narcissism. I mean, it's not that part is not mysterious. Okay, but I'd like to try to offer first sort of like kind of not a different definition. I subscribe to the normal definition of narcissism. Okay, I think if you look at the DSM, basically they have all these criteria, and essentially what the criteria describe is somebody who has an overinflated involvement in their own personal self. Okay, and they have sort of a diminished sense of what's outside of their personal orbit, basically. I mean, I'm sort of paraphrasing, but basically a person who's narcissistic, they're going to come across as just exaggeratedly involved and preoccupied with their personal affairs and sort of a very diminished sense of the importance of what's outside of them, including other people. All right. And you can sort of add to that where because they have sort of a diminished sense of the importance of other people, they will tend to operate with other people as though other people were objects or like tools or like pawns, or sort of exploitative with other people, and just kind of so just always reflecting kind of a diminished sense of the worth and value of other people because they're so flooded with the importance of their own personal orbit. So that is essentially kind of the narcissistic distortion, if you want to call it that. But I think all of us kind of understand that. I don't even think it's a big debate. What is narcissism in terms of what it looks like? Okay, but I think there is room for debate as to what makes people narcissistic. I don't think psychology has really has really explained why people are narcissistic. The best they can do, I think, is they say, well, you come from a bad childhood and you get complex trauma, and the trauma somehow causes whatever. But it's kind of like they don't really explain in terms of neurology why a person is that way. Okay, so I'm going to offer at least my attempt to sort of explain sort of like why people are narcissistic. Okay, and so I'm just going to propose this. Okay. I don't know if people can relate to this, but I don't think of myself, and I don't think anybody thinks of themselves as just being one person. I think when we really think about it, okay, the person I am when I get angry, okay, is not the person that I am when I'm calm and unguarded and undefended. Okay. Obviously, I'm really not the same person. Okay. When I'm really upset, or when I'm really paranoid, or when I'm really concerned, or I have a deadline, or when I'm preoccupied, I am not the same person as when I am just relaxed and just unguarded, right? I mean, it's almost like you're not really the same person, okay? And I think if you sort of take that and expand that, okay, um, I think if we're honest, I think we'll understand that there's almost like when we think of what is our personality, I think we could almost admit that there are like layers to our personality, right? And I think all of us can understand that sometimes I've had moments where I could be upset about something, but another part of me is sort of watching it happen, you know? So you could almost say that while I'm being upset, there's another part of me that's sort of observing and sort of taking notes, so to speak, or sort of like the watcher, you know? And you could almost say, okay, well, I have at least like two parts of me, you know what I mean? Like I'm not really one person. I'm sort of like a combination of the part that's watching the action and the part that's actually engaging in the action, you might say, right? So now, of course, I can't prove this, but I think this is an experience that I've had, and I think other people may have a similar experience, right? And so basically, the way before I approach my definition of narcissism, or I should say, kind of an alternative reason why people are narcissistic, okay? I accept the DSM definition, but I'm trying to give sort of an account, right? So as I approach this, I'd like to kind of examine first how I really think that most of us have layers, okay? And I think that the different layers to our basic personality, whatever, involves some layers that are relatively more sort of just kind of like unguarded and just sort of watching, kind of unguarded watchers versus activated operators. Okay, so think of it this way: that you have sort of like so at least when we're relaxed, if you're just fishing, if you're just sitting and just watching a sunset or just, you know, admiring the landscape or whatever, that you're probably engaging with the world maybe through sort of an unguarded watcher, you know, kind of an observer. Think of it as an observer narrator. And so that's a part of you that's not really an activated operator. It's sort of sort of an unguarded observer, you know. And so what I'm thinking is that in some people, okay, whatever is the neurology that gets involved in the activated operations, okay, or the activated reactions. So in other words, the part of you that gets irritated and angry, or you're under a deadline and you have to hurry up and do things, and the part of you that engages like in actual reaction and actually like operating in the world, okay, or even like even frantically operating in the world, right? So you could almost say that there's parts of us that are sort of like activated operators, all right? And those are going to be the parts of us that get very reactive, get very provoked and reactive in the course of living a life, right? But not just the parts of us that react, like say by getting angry or by getting like irritated, but also the parts of us that get like say stimulated, like fascinated. You know what I mean? So in other words, the parts of us that get kind of stimulated and react. It doesn't always have to be negative. It doesn't always have to be like getting angry. It could also be like maybe falling in love, or maybe being like enchanted by something. Or like say you go to a shopping mall and oh my god, I like that product or whatever, I want to buy like clothing or whatever, you know, that the part of us that gets like attracted to things and, you know, gets stimulated, okay? But also the part of us that gets ambitious, you know, like oh my god, I want to get a master's degree and I want to have this job and I want to make this much money. Okay, those are the parts of us that are kind of like aroused and activated, right? And I think in some people, including myself, right? When you go through life with all of life's enchantments, all of life's attractions, all of the excitements of life, and the irritations, the provocations, and the things that make you angry, you know, all the whole spectrum. Okay. Some of us kind of identify more with the activated, like the activated operators, and not so much with the parts of us that are just the neutral, unguarded observer. Okay. And so I guess I would propose that, in my opinion, okay, if for some reason we get too much involved with, like, say, the activated operator in life, okay, and when, like, say, the unguarded watcher becomes sort of relatively kind of unexpressed or kind of dormant, okay, I think that will severely change how we are able to have, like, say, an executive function in the world, okay, because I think to have a I would call it a sane or sober, like a sober, I guess, a sober executive function. I think you have to have a combination, a good resonance and combination and harmony between the unguarded watcher and the activated operators, okay, or the provoked operators, right? And I think that in some people, I don't know if it's just like a neurological issue, or maybe it's like a lack of practice or a lack of conditioning. But I think in some people, they get so flooded by the stimulations of the activated operators that I think the unguarded watchers become almost like dormant, or they become, in some cases, I think in some people, through, like, say, dissociation and psychotic fragmentation, they almost become broken away. So you don't have an integrated self. Okay. And at least in the case of Lori Vallow, when I look at her, I sense that at the bottom of her personality, I think there's a lot of dissociation, like violent dissociation. And I think a lot of, like, almost psychotic fragmentation. Okay. So I think that disturbance, I think, is so, it almost deserves to be called a mental illness. But what it does is it effectively breaks communication between the unguarded watcher and the actual activated operators. Okay. So that really, even if she wanted to try to practice integrating her personality, I think she would have to confront a major psychological disturbance at the bottom that would deserve to be called mental illness. Okay, so I think in those cases, I think the prospect of trying to recover and develop, a more integrated personality might be very difficult, and maybe without medication, it might almost be impossible. Okay, whereas I think with a person like Wendy Adelson, I suspect, okay, I just get the feeling that, and I'm sorry, please don't get angry. It's just my impression, right? I could be wrong. But I get the impression that at the bottom of her narcissism, okay, I think that the unguarded watcher, I think, is there, and I don't think it's dissociated. I don't think there's a fragmentation like with Lori Vallow, but I just think that she may have sort of habituated herself to become sort of, to locate what she thinks is her whole personhood, maybe more in the activated operators, kind of neglecting the unguarded watcher. Okay. So I think in those cases, honestly, I think there is a lot of hope for recovery, because it's not like you have at the bottom like a mental illness that would prevent you from possibly integrating. It's just something that's been neglected and rendered dormant. Okay. So this is the first difference I want to point out between Lori Vallow and Wendy Adelson. Is I think Wendy Adelson, honestly, as guilty as she may be or not, I don't know how guilty she is of actually, causing the death of her ex-husband, but I do think that regardless of her guilt, I think she would actually have more promise and more of a positive chance to maybe better integrate her personality if she wanted to. And of course, I'm just stating my opinion. I don't know this to be a fact. But in any case, I think that what produces the narcissism is, for whatever reason, through a combination of acquiring maybe bad attitudes, maybe a combination of acquiring kind of, just the wrong set of values, the wrong approach to life. But you end up sort of kind of disregarding or detaching, or kind of leaving behind, or having something, or even a disturbance like with Lori, where you have some kind of fragmentation or some kind of dissociation that causes you to lose communication between the part of you that is the unguarded watcher, okay, and the parts of you that are the active operators, okay, that somehow you haven't even, or maybe you haven't even discovered that those two can operate in harmony together. And so that you don't have to have one versus the other, but they can work together to provide a more integrated executive function. Okay. And I think that people who have a very strong connection with their unguarded watcher, just the watcher, right? I think those people will have a much more stable and much more integrated, sort of a persistent, solid sense of self. Okay. Whereas I think that people who sort of locate their identity more in the reactive operator, okay, I think those people will tend to have a very changing and a very, and even if it's not a changing sense of self, I think their sense of self will be, will have less integrity. Okay. And I think their actual executive operations will be more risky, more risky. Okay. And they will tend to, I think, operate, they'll tend to commit acts of poor judgment, I think, more easily. And I think that's a way that I think we can understand maybe how the Adelsons approached the divorce litigation, and also how Dan, I have to say, approached the divorce litigation. Because I think if he had more perspective, okay, he might have said, okay, if I want to, I can throw this bomb and I could throw this nuclear option and I can get Wendy disbarred and I can threaten her career or whatever. But if he just had a little more perspective, he could have said, but I also have to make sure that I don't become the mortal enemy of these people. So how can I maybe strike a balance? So you need perspective for that. So obviously people who have a better relationship with the unguarded watcher are going to have, just by nature, a broader perspective. Okay. And that's exactly the perspective that we see missing in narcissistic people, because they're so flooded with their immediate stimulations. Okay. And so I personally think that probably what causes narcissism, what causes it, not what it is, but what causes narcissism, I think may be a lack of integrity or a lack of harmony or integration between the part of us that is the unguarded watcher and the parts of us that are the activated operators. Okay, so that the actual sense of self, the sense of who we are, doesn't have that breadth of kind of multi-layer, kind of I don't know, that multi-layer integration. Okay, and so that what'll happen is that a narcissism actually has a mistaken sense of who they are, because they somehow fall into the distortion that their sense of themselves is only located in the parts of them that are sort of aroused and activated and operating, and they've sort of lost touch with that part of them that's sort of the unguarded kind of just watcher. Okay. And that will produce the distortion that we see in narcissism. Okay, where you need that watcher to have that broader panorama to be able to take in the seriousness of the realities outside your personal space. Okay, because if you're just located just in the reactive parts of your psychology, you're going to be so flooded with the noise of all the things that are concerning you in the close orbit, that you're really going to lose the perspective, and you're not going to have any perspective. So, and the other thing too, I propose, and it's just a guess, but I think that the parts of us that are sort of the unguarded watchers, I think those are the parts of us that can actually endure and abide more frustration and irritation and even pain. Okay. Those are the parts of it, because they're not inherently reactive. Okay. So that even if somebody stabs me in the arm, okay, obviously the part of me that reacts is going to be very much in pain, right? But if I have a good connection with the part of me that's the unguarded watcher, there is also a part of me that even if you stab me in the arm is just going to be watching and seeing it happen. Like imagine people that go to the emergency room, and even though they're in terrible pain, there's a part of them that's just kind of watching it all happen. And I think it's just kind of a reminder that even when we're in trauma, and even when we've been injured or we're under intense pain, there's a part of us that just is just watching it happen. And so I think that we need that resource to integrate with the activated parts of us, because that's the part of us that can sort of bear frustration and bear pain, and is capable of rendering sacrifice and sort of taking on, maybe unpleasant things. And so I think that may be why people who are narcissistic, they're not just engrossed in their personal affairs, but also they have a remarkable lack of ability to tolerate frustrating and irritating and infuriating things. They can't really just bear it. And so basically, in that sense of narcissism, I would say I see Wendy Adelson. Okay, I see her basically very much kind of located, like her identity is very much located in the parts of her that are maybe like intrigued and enchanted by people who have good careers, by people who work in academia, by people who have a good pedigree, who've gone to Harvard, who have like good careers and good credentials, or people who have success, like her brother, very successful as a periodontist. And I think that's very heavily expressed in her. So that's also the part of her that might be very ambitious. It might be very preoccupied maybe with the way she looks and her poise and her presence, because I think all those things I think that's let's say the unguarded watcher is kind of indifferent to all that. It just takes in the whole panorama. Whereas the activated operator parts of us are the ones that get really enchanted, really fascinated, really envious, whatever, or also very irritated or angry. So I think for whatever reason, I think her personality is very much located in the activated operators, and she's kind of like lost her connection, I think, or at least she may still have her unguarded watcher, but she's kind of let it fall out of how she identifies as a person. So it's not really part of her. It's not really a big part of her identity, or maybe not enough of her identity to cause to strike a balance with the activated parts. And I'll definitely say that for people who tend to be more people who are more sensitive and more reactive just by nature, they're going to tend to have more risk of being narcissistic, okay, unless they can sort of artificially like discover their unguarded watcher and sort of intentionally develop a relationship with it to have that kind of like safeguard, to kind of balance out the reactive parts of us. So anyway, that's kind of my impression of Wendy, that I think that she is just consumed in the world of ambition and sort of being fascinated by how people look or their pedigree or their resume or whatever, and being successful in the world. And it doesn't mean she has to always be that way. It just means that sometimes people may just have a lot of intensity in those areas, and you have to sort of intentionally look for the parts of you that do exist. I mean, she's like anybody, she does have her unguarded watcher, but you have to maybe kind of really work to find it and to sort of welcome it into who you really are, because it is part of you. um anyway, so I think that Wendy has that. And like I said, I think Lori Vallow also has that. Lori Vallow, it's just that I think that what's causing her not to have a good relationship with her unguarded watcher is I think she must have a lot of violent dissociation and probably psychotic fragmentation that probably without medication, she probably never could really recover any kind of meaningful connection to her unguarded watcher. I think in her case, I think it would be much more difficult. All right. But anyway, leaving those two things aside and looking at the differences and the similarities, I do want to notice one thing very important, which is that why would a person like Lori or Wendy learn to be so effective through passive aggression? Okay. And what do I mean by that? When both Lori and Wendy need to take care of their most extreme personal problems, they both seem to fall into a pattern of operating through what I would call remote control. Okay. Remote control, where they're just so good at manipulating that they're able to effectuate like real serious destruction by somehow not being personally the author and not personally committing the destructive act. So, for example, when Lori wanted to have Charles destroyed, Charles Vallow was one of her ex-husbands. She I don't think it ever occurred to her that she could personally kill him. I think she may have considered poisoning him. But if you think about it, poisoning is kind of a passive aggressive way to kill somebody, right? But I think in the end, she sort of found a kind of almost like a witchcraft way to sort of operate through remote control, where she was able to have Charles killed, but by basically inspiring someone else to do it. Okay. And I think that is very similar to what we see with Wendy, that when she is very upset about something, a relationship, and is just beside herself, like doesn't know what to do with this guy, Dan Markel, she somehow found a way, I think, to inspire people to set a chain of events where by remote control, he would be killed, so that she wouldn't have to feel like directly, she wasn't directly killing anybody. So I think what we see in both Lori and Wendy is sort of an uncanny talent for having things done through remote control. Okay. And I do think this is connected to how I describe narcissism, because I think the desperation to manipulate people, okay, you can't really manipulate people if you don't sort of project to other people a sense of desperation, okay? One of the most effective elements, or one of the most important elements of manipulating other people, is creating a sense of like hurry, like this is crucial. This is like, we don't have a lot of time. Like, I don't know how to say it better in English, but I sound like Hilaria Baldwin. But this idea that it's like urgency. And so I think in order to manipulate people, you have to sort of create a sensation of urgency and desperation, because you will infect the other person with a sense of being desperate for you, and they want to save you, basically. So I think that you won't have that exaggerated sense of urgency and desperation if you have a well-developed integrity with your unguarded watcher. Okay, because the unguarded watcher can abide a lot of frustration, and can abide and bear a lot of pain and a lot of discomfort. But for people to be effective manipulators, they have to be located in that reactive part of the psychology, where everything is urgent and everything is desperate. Okay, so I think that you cannot manipulate people if you don't transmit a sense of urgency and desperation. And I think what happened is, I think in the case of this murder, I think Wendy was desperate and urgent about how she wanted to handle the divorce. I think it wasn't just that she wanted to move to South Florida, it was that it was urgent for her to get to South Florida, okay? And it was desperate for her to get to South Florida, because she had it that, the only law firm where she could work would be in South Florida. That was just how it was. And the only family that could really give a good life to her children was her family in South Florida. So it wasn't just that was good, but it also was urgent for her, because she doesn't have a good connection with the unguarded neutral watcher. That's typical of narcissism, right? And so I think she transmitted that urgency and that desperation to people around her. Okay. And so when Dan Markel started making it even more difficult by basically in litigation, really opposing her wish to live in South Florida, I think that she became extra urgent and extra desperate. Okay. And that is sort of the vehicle by which she sort of transmitted to other people, like she displaced into other people that desperate need to sort of pacify her and to make her feel better. Okay. Because she doesn't have her own unguarded watcher. She needs to have something activated in the world to actually solve the problem, as opposed to just dealing with it. Right. And so the people around her, her brother, her mother, they could feel her desperation. And the instinct is, we need to solve this. Okay. Not tolerate it, but we need to deal with it. Okay. And when something causes you aggravation, urgency, and desperation, psychologically, what you want to do, if you can't tolerate it, you want to destroy it. Okay. And so I think this is where Wendy is very similar to Lori Vallow, because Lori Vallow, in the end, when she's activated and provoked in the right way, she becomes a destroyer. Okay, a destroyer. Likewise, Wendy, she gets so desperate, so urgent and desperate, that you want to destroy what's causing that desperation. So she is also a destroyer in that sense. Okay, but she operates like Lori through remote control. In other words, she makes other people feel her desperation, and they feel desperate to solve and destroy the thing that's causing her the aggravation. So I think that psychologically what's happening is that Wendy transmitted an extreme sense of urgency, an extreme sense of desperation, and she infected other people with the instinct to destroy what was causing her disturbance and her urgency and her desperation. So anyway, that's just kind of a sketch, but I hope that's been helpful, and appreciate your patience. I'm sure I could be more eloquent, but thanks for watching.